Robby-Jo Coulter, a good-hearted 17-year-old, was a confident and outgoing young man who, like many teenagers, had a mischievous streak. Growing up in Buronga, New South Wales, Australia, with his mother Susie, stepfather Linton, and two sisters, Tiffany and Tina, Robbie was a beloved member of his family. However, in 1988, he made the bold decision to strike out on his own, moving into a small apartment on Olive Avenue in Mildura, just 11 kilometres away from his childhood home. Despite the distance, Robbie remained close to his family, often returning to his parents' home for meals almost daily. As he didn't have a job at the time, money was likely tight, but he cherished the freedom and independence that came with having a new apartment. Despite its small size, the space allowed him to spread his wings and forge his own path. Mildura, a small town in New South Wales, was home to a significant Italian-Australian community, with some families holding powerful connections to the mafia. These organised crime groups were deeply involved in the drugs trade, particularly in the cultivation of marijuana. In fact, Mildura was considered one of the two main hubs of marijuana cultivation in the state, alongside Griffith in Melbourne. More recently, the town has been grappling with a methamphetamine epidemic. In the aftermath of World War II, many Italians migrated to Mildura in search of a fresh start. However, they found that the fruit-growing industry didn't yield the financial rewards they had hoped for. It was during this time that the more powerful families turned to the lucrative marijuana trade. The region's warm climate made it an ideal location for growing the plant, and they were able to reap a substantial profit from selling the finished product. Mildura was a town shrouded in darkness, where violence and intimidation were a constant presence. The Calabrian mafia held the town in its grasp, ruling with an iron fist and striking fear into the hearts of its residents. The locals lived in a state of perpetual terror, knowing that if they dared to speak out against the mafia's tyranny, they would face a gruesome and brutal end. The mafia's grip was suffocating, and its reach was long. Even the smallest whisper of dissent could be met with deadly consequences. In 1982, a local greengrocer and his parents were brutally murdered by the organised crime group after allegedly revealing the names of top bosses in New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia. This devastating act served as a chilling warning to all. Keep your mouth shut or risk losing your life. The residents of Mildura knew that silence was the only way to survive, and that any attempt to defy the mafia would be met with merciless retaliation. On December 31st, 1988, 17-year-old Robby-Jo Coulter bid farewell to his humble apartment in Mildura and headed to the Buronga Caravan Park, where 6 of his friends awaited. The group gathered on the banks of the Murray River, sipping a flagon of port and sharing laughter as they counted down to midnight. Despite the festive atmosphere, Robbie didn't seem to be overindulging in the drink. His flagon was still half full the next day. As the night wore on, Robbie took a break to visit his friend, who was starting a shift at the Shell Roadhouse service station. For about an hour, he and his friends indulged in playful pranks and jokes, creating a lively atmosphere. After his visit, Robbie made his way back to his parents' home, which was just a short 500-metre walkway. He wanted to wish them a happy New Year's Eve before the clock struck midnight. According to Robbie's parents, Linton and Susie Coulter, who was heavily pregnant with their third daughter at the time, Robbie seemed to be in high spirits that night, but he was not intoxicated. He appeared to be completely in control of himself, with no signs of impairment. As the night wore on, Robbie returned to the Shell Roadhouse service station, where he spent another hour socialising with his friends. At around 4 a.m. on New Year's Day, he bid his friends farewell, waving goodbye as he walked off into the dead of night. It was the last time anyone saw him alive. The road stretched out before him, shrouded in darkness, and Robby vanished into the night, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a family forever changed. As the hours ticked by, Robby's family grew increasingly anxious, unable to reach him since the early hours of New Year's morning. It was unheard of for Robby to miss a meal with his family, so his parents' concerns deepened. They searched for him, but there was no sign of him. 2 days passed, and still Robby was nowhere to be found. It wasn't until January 3rd, 1989, at around 8:30 p.m, that a pair of campers on holiday beside the Murray River stumbled upon a disturbing discovery. As they made their way along the riverbank, they spotted what appeared to be a mannequin lying in the shallow waters between Trentham Cliffs and Monac. But as they drew closer, their horror grew. They had found a bloated human corpse floating in the water. The campers quickly pulled the body from the river and alerted authorities to their gruesome discovery. But what the authorities found when they arrived at the scene would leave them stunned and shaken. The body was that of 17-year-old Robby-Jo Coulter, his body sinisterly wrapped in heavy chains and weighed down with bricks. A chain had been bolted to the teen's left ankle with the bolts burred so that the nuts couldn't be undone. The chain was wound around Robby's body, travelling under his right buttock, twice around his stomach, up along his back and bolted to his right wrist, his hands bound behind his back. A number of other chains and bolts had been used to fasten 2 large concrete bricks to Robby-Jo's body to weigh him down in the water, the weight totalling approximately 21 kilograms. The post-mortem examination revealed that Robby had been alive when he entered the water, likely at a spot not far from where his badly decomposed body was found, and it was concluded that the teen had most likely died as a result of drowning. According to one source, Robby had a blood alcohol level reading of 0.21, meaning that he was quite drunk at the time of death. A body alcohol level of 0.2 generally means that the person is likely to become confused, and they may even struggle to stand. They suffer lack of physical and mental control, such as having blurred vision, slurred speech, and mood swings. Such a level does also sometimes result in blackouts and even injury, but due to the state of intoxication, such injuries may not have been noticed by the person or persons involved. Other than a few minor abrasions, the autopsy report also concluded that there were no injuries present on the teen's body, nor were there any signs of struggle. Robby hadn't appeared to have tried to free himself from the chains. There is the possibility, of course, that Robby may have been unconscious when he entered the water. However, there was no evidence to suggest that this was the case. One of the most intriguing aspects of Robby's case is the disappearance of several personal items from his remains. A brand new pair of white Aerosport running shoes and an earring from his left ear, which appeared to be a cross-shaped design, were missing. Investigators suspect that these items were removed from his body before his death, but despite extensive searches by police diving teams in the Murray River and surrounding areas, they have yet to be found. The scene of Robby's death was a chilling and incomprehensible one. It was a violent and seemingly ritualistic act that left authorities stunned and searching for answers. The 17-year-old's murder was, in the words of authorities, the most bizarre and violent death they had witnessed in the previous 12 months. The brutality of the crime has left investigators grappling with the question, why would anyone commit such a heinous act? The mystery only deepened as investigators continued to piece together the events surrounding Robby's disappearance and death. One clue suggests that Robby did return home safely on New Year's Day, as his wallet and black waterproof Parker jacket were found in his apartment, the same jacket he was wearing that night. But what happened after he returned home remains a mystery. leaving investigators to fill in the blanks and search for answers. The question on everyone's mind is how Robby ended up in the Murray River, where his body was discovered weighed down with chains and bricks. The investigation has been trying to unravel the mystery of how he got from his apartment in Mildura to the river. Did he leave his apartment voluntarily, or was he forced in some way? What happened to him in those final moments, and what led to his tragic and violent death? In the aftermath of Robby's mysterious passing, several witnesses from Buronga stepped forward to share their accounts with authorities. One eyewitness recounted a chilling incident, claiming to have heard a faint scream around 4 a.m. followed by an abrupt silence. The witness also alleged that they saw a motorboat speeding up the Murray River, not far from their residence, and a car moving slowly back towards Mildura. While these events may be unconnected to Robby's untimely death, investigators are working to establish any possible links between them. The investigation into Robby's tragic death continued, but it wasn't until later that a disturbing revelation emerged. Robby's stepfather revealed that Robby had confided in him several times before his death about witnessing a significant drug deal in Mildura 2 months prior. According to Robby, the incident occurred in the dead of night, around 2 a.m, when he was wide awake as a habitual night owl. He claimed to have seen a car pull up to the side of the road, dropped off a suitcase, and then drove away. Shortly after, another car stopped and collected the suitcase before speeding off. Robby was allegedly shaken by the experience, telling his stepfather that he had been threatened by someone with a knife after witnessing the deal. He was so frightened for his life that he considered going into hiding, convinced that those involved in the deal were out to harm him. It remains unclear whether Robby knew the individuals involved in the drug transaction or not, but it is clear that he was not involved in the drug trade himself. This new information has added another layer of complexity to the investigation, and authorities are working to determine whether this incident may be connected to Robby's untimely demise. As the investigation into Robby's death continued, the Coulter family became increasingly convinced that he had been the victim of a mafia-style execution, allegedly in retaliation for witnessing this alleged drug deal. However, the police seemed to be leaning towards a different theory, that Robby's death was either a suicide or an accident, possibly a prank gone wrong with his friends. According to another source, Robby's friends remained tight-lipped about what happened that night, leading some to speculate that they know more than they were letting on, while others believed they were simply too traumatized to relive the events of that night. Some even accused Robby's stepfather of being involved, but he has consistently maintained his innocence. Despite the ongoing investigation, the person or persons responsible for Robby-Jo Coulter's death remain at large, and the truth behind his tragic demise remains elusive. The New South Wales police were convinced that Robby had taken his own life, despite the evidence pointing to a different conclusion. However, the Coulter family and the Victorian police disagreed and believed that it was impossible for Robby to have committed suicide under the circumstances. The police's conclusion seemed bizarre, especially when considering the evidence. A 17-year-old boy could not have tied his own hands behind his back with chains and secured them with bolts, nor could he have weighed his own body down with chains and bricks before throwing himself into the river. It was a physically impossible feat. The family and the Victorian police were adamant that someone else was responsible for Robby's death, and that the evidence suggested a deliberate and calculated act of murder rather than a suicide. The inquest into Robby's death, held in 1990, was concluded by New South Wales Deputy Coroner Derek Hand with an open verdict. While he was satisfied that Robby had not been murdered, he deemed the death suspicious and did not rule out the possibility of foul play. In contrast, the Victorian police were more convinced that the drug drop theory was the most likely explanation for Robby's death. Interestingly, according to a newspaper article, Robby's biological father claimed that he knew the Mildura crime boss who allegedly orchestrated his son's murder. While the drug drop theory may seem far-fetched to some, it is certainly a plausible possibility given the presence of organised crime groups in Mildura and its history of involvement in criminal activity. 30 years after Robby-Jo's mysterious death, in January 2019, a social media campaign by the Coulter family prompted the authorities to reopen the case. The family is eager to uncover the truth behind his bizarre death, and they are urging anyone with information to come forward. The case is now being reviewed by the Unsolved Homicide Unit, with the goal of finally bringing closure to the family and bringing justice to Robby. Despite the passing of over 35 years, the Coulter family remains convinced that the truth lies within Mildura and is urging anyone with any information regarding Robby's death to contact Australian Crime Stoppers on 1800 333 000. The family's determination to uncover the truth is a testament to their unwavering commitment to finding out what happened to Robby in his final moments on that fateful New Year's Day of 1989.